Sabrina Doyle, thanks for having you here for the interview and bringing us this amazing feature debut, Lorelei. It is, beautifully shot. It's very considerably effectively told. Um, it's very unique in the way you're directing the actors. So it's very astonishing for a debut, and it gives us the feeling you did quite some short films before, and I think one can see that in this film because it has this maturity. So could you tell us a bit about your film experience before you went on to make this great project, Lorelei?
I had I'd made a film. I'm not one of those people that knew they wanted to be a filmmaker from a young age. My background is very blue collar, working class. The only people I knew, the only jobs I knew that people had were kind of manual jobs, and sort of my dad was a builder. Everyone I knew everyone I knew except for my teachers at school did a manual job. So it wasn't until I went to university and I started watching films at university at Cambridge. There's a wonderful picture house in Cambridge where I started watching films on the big screen. And I have to say it was the big screen experience that inspired me to want to be a filmmaker. And I think it was I remember actually the precise moment where I decided I wanted to be a director. And it was when, do you remember at the beginning of Apocalypse Now, there's an image of the jungle and there are helicopters flying past. And then just at the moment where Jim Morrison says, "This is the end," the jungle explodes. And I was like, oh, so a filmmaker decided to make that moment of the song coincide with that moment of the image. And that was a decision that someone took, and it's really effective and and I realized that there was intent behind that. I mean, I think it's a funny thing that people experience films as emotional experiences, but when you realize that there's an intent to that moment and that moment was designed to make you feel that way, that would, for me at that point, was a revelation. And so at that point, I decided I wanted to be a director. So I made a short film. I was, young and naive about this industry. And I made a short film immediately after university. And it was called Polanów. And I shot it in Poland. And for a first film, I mean, I was very lucky. I shot in a beautiful location on a frozen lake in Poland with two actors who were great. Everything went right for me with that film. And it was the film turned out really well. And the first film festival I ever went to in Cologne in Germany, we won the jury prize, the first jury prize. And as a result of that, Arte bought our film and screened our film on Arte. So it was a wonderful, and so I'm very grateful to, I think there's a wonderful film festival tradition in Germany that I just love. I went back the following year to Cologne and was a juror for that festival. I mean, so I'm so excited about, coming to Germany, hopefully, touch wood, all going well. But then after that, I didn't know how to turn that film into a career. And there's a career, there's the sort of artistic side of it, and there's also just the career side of it. Films cost money. It's not, it's not like writing a novel or painting a painting. It takes sort of resources and people to put a film together. So for a number of years, I was trying to figure out how to turn this successful short film and this desire to be a filmmaker into a career. And I started, in the meantime, I started working for the BBC as a journalist. So I was a journalist for a number of years at BBC, which was a great job. Definitely you learn about storytelling at the BBC. You learn about leadership, I think, and having, the confidence to pitch ideas. But it was, and I got so much out of that job, but it was, my passion was still narrative filmmaking, and after a number of years at the BBC, I thought, I could see it's so good here at the BBC that I could see myself staying here unless I make a break right now. So I decided to make a break. I was very lucky. I got a Fulbright scholarship to go to the US to do my master's in film directing at the American Film Institute in Los Angeles. And so I went to the States, and that was sort of the beginning of me committing full time to this career. And so I made a number of short films when I was at AFI, and then a number of short films after AFI. I've made a lot of shorts at this point, different types of shorts. Shorts are great. They teach you, you experiment with different genres, and I think, for me, film school was interesting because everyone at film school was making different types of films. Some people were making Westerns, some people were making musicals. I think for a while at film school, I had a crisis of, I could do anything. What is my voice? And you kind of lose your way a bit at film school, I think, because you see that there are many other types of films that you can make. And you start experimenting a bit, and your taste goes a bit wild, and then you sort of but you learn a lot of you learn a lot of craft, I think. And then I think slowly after film school was the process of reclaiming my voice again. And I think in some ways this film is quite similar to the very first film I made, Polanov, which makes me happy because there's a continuity, I think, there's a sort of tone, a sort of melancholy, a kind of, there's a similarity of tone, I think, between the two films that makes me happy, because it means I've sort of found my way back again to where I was, before. But the film school experience is an invaluable experience. But it is interesting because, sort of maintaining the consistency, like figuring out what your voice is and what you have to say, is something that young filmmakers ask me about all the time. This week, I did a lecture to some students at Chapman University in the States. They watched my film and I spoke to them about it afterwards. And the question that kept coming up is, how do you figure out what your voice is? What I said to them was, someone said to me, which I think was very wise, is that your identity as a filmmaker comes in your blind spots. So it doesn't come in what you can do, it comes in what you don't see, because then you have a tunnel vision, and you have a singularity of vision, and it's because you don't see this and you don't see this, but you see this. And for me, that's very reassuring, because it means that in a way your deficiencies, what you don't see, are what makes you your strength as a filmmaker. So, I said to them, some filmmakers are not very good at movement. Filmmakers are amazing at movement, and all the emotion from their films comes through their use of the camera and movement. Some filmmakers don't understand movement and love static shots where people come in and out of frame. And I think in many ways, you just have to embrace your deficiencies as a filmmaker and really, because I think that is, and so I've learned that I'm not going to be every type of filmmaker for every different type of person. And I think that's part of the growth and the journey of having said that, I do think LORELEI tries to do lots of different things at once, maybe too many. It's quite ambitious in that, for a for a film that is in a community, it's gritty, it's real, it's in a blue collar community. Usually those types of films have a particular style, and I think this film deviates a little bit from that style, and some people I think find that difficult because it sort of doesn't meet their expectations of what that film should be. But
I think you talked about storytelling you learned at the BBC, and you really are the film's author. You also wrote the script.
Yeah.
And when you talk, obviously, and I would like to talk about that later on, the setting of the film is very special, the milieu it depicts. And you're talking about expectations, that might be undergone. And I think I felt what very special about your approach is that you're hinting, it has the setting of the social drama with lots of different elements, the guy coming back from the prison. And we know from watching films what's supposed to happen in a way of a genre convention. And I always felt like you're hinting there, but then at some point, and for me that was very rewarding, you're always going kind of, another direction around the corner. Maybe you could talk about a little bit about this, handling genre conventions in this way.
Yes, it was very challenging to make this film that way, because when I got sort of certain notes back from people, the notes would be, for example, great, I love it, redemption story, man coming out of prison, but I wanted to see him fall back into crime. I wanted to see him really go back into that life, and I wanted to see more of the biker gang, and I wanted to see him do crime with them. And that's a very different movie. Then that kind of is what this movie sets you up to do. It sets you up to kind of be a classic story of a man who kind of gets pulled back into that life, and you see a bit of that life, and then eventually he emerges, or he doesn't. Usually he fights through and kind of you know, there's an ending that sort of resolves things. You know, I think part of the complexity of this film comes from the fact that it is a kind of classic hero's journey, but it is also the secondary characters and the co-lead, the female character Dolores. All of those characters have very distinctive arcs as well. And I think, you know, when I was writing the script, I wrote the story, and then I did a pass of the script where I focused specifically on the female character, and I really worked on her arc and her story. And she's, you know, she's a kind of antagonist to the protagonist. She's also the object of, she's also what he wants, but she's also the antagonist. She's also the one that kind of, in a way, she's the antagonist, not the kind of, not the criminality. And I think that's kind of interesting, because I think too often the female character is there to help the male character on their journey to redemption, and that's her role. And she kind of is there in a role, sort of, she's there as a crutch to him. And I wanted, you know, I wanted, even though the story is his story primarily, the film is named after her. And I was inspired, but just as a quick aside, obviously the sort of the 19th century German poem De Lorelei was kind of like what the film, I mean, it's a sort of sea siren name that we took as the name of the film, which I think is just a nice thing. But she, you know, I think having her as a really strong antagonist with her own arc, her own story, her own desires that do not mesh with the main character's desires, I think that's what kind of takes it off in a direction that you don't expect. And I also, when I was writing the script, did a pass for the children. So I did a pass where I just focused, you know, a draft of the script where I just focused on the children and made sure that they were sort of complex and not too cute, but had each child would have their own arc as well. So I think in just giving each character the time and space and attention that they deserve, you kind of have a film where there are different centers of gravity in the film. The center of gravity is not just will he or won't he go back to prison. And, you know, again, that's kind of something that's a challenge, because a lot of people want a more linear story. And I think this version is possibly a bit less commercial for some people. But I did also want the film to be accessible to a lot of people. So I put stuff in the film that I thought would be just like visual spectacle stuff, like the bike stuff. And I think that just kind of excites audiences, that sort of thing. And they kind of know what world they're in. Like, the good thing about genre is that you know what world you're in, and you kind of, you sort of, you're familiar, you're not, you know, you can go along for the ride. It's like it's like getting on a roller coaster, right? And you know you're not going to die because you know the roller coaster's safe, and so you can go on the ride. And I think genre gives you that kind of scaffolding. And so I don't, you know, I like films that meet certain genre conventions, but then I sort of love it when they kind of twist them a little bit. And that's what I was trying to do. I mean, you know, in many ways I'm trying to have the best of all worlds. I'm sort of greedy, and you know, and I think it's sort of you know, I think the films I love are the films that inspire me are the films that do that, you know, the films that work, that have, you know, they're not too you know, they work on a very classical level on one level, but then they're also kind of subverting that here and there, but they're not subverting it so much that you don't know what story you're in, and you know, you still have your footing in the story. So that's what I was trying to do with that. And you know, I think, you know, and I think for me, I'm really, you know, so far I feel that this film has been really beautifully received in Europe, and that makes me really happy as a European filmmaker who made a film in America. And I do feel it has that kind of European sensibility almost, and which is, you know, again, gratifying, because one of the films that I was thinking of when I first started writing Lorelei, the film that I thought in my head that I wanted it to be like was Paris, Texas by Wim Wenders, which is, again, a film about America, about the American dream, about American masculinity, but made from a European filmmaker's perspective. And you know, I don't know what Americans think of Paris, Texas. I think some Americans really love it. I love it. I mean, to me, it's kind of one of the films that made me start dreaming about America when I was still in Europe. So,
you know, when Wenders was here with his early films at the festival.
I know, that's great. And I feel in wonderful, you know, company.
Yeah, and I just think, I don't know if you know, we have another film at the festival by Bastian Günther, a German-based or Germany born director, who also did a film in the US, One of These Days, with Joe Cole. And I was also completely astonished, because very often that doesn't work out. If someone goes, from kind of a different culture, has this outer perspective and tries, but I think both of you really succeeded, and that's something these two films have in common. When you just said, you talked about your craft, and part of the craft obviously is directing the actors, and you said you're a bit greedy in wanting everything. It seems you've been very greedy about the actors. I mean, Jenna Malone and Pablo Schreiber, they are really crafted, talented, but they are also very high class and prestigious, not your average feature film debut cast. How did you manage to convince them for this project, to have them on this project?
I think this is where having a wonderful producer comes in handy. So my producer, Kevin Chinoy, had produced the Florida Project, which was, and so I, and various other films by Sean Baker, the director of the Florida Project. He's been working with him for a long time, and Kevin is just a veteran in the industry. And we were just so lucky with this film that Kevin read the script and liked it and wanted to work with me. And honestly, I think that having Kevin on the team gave the actors and the agents the confidence to say yes, because they liked the script, obviously. And I think for Pablo, I think this was a chance to show a tenderness that he hadn't shown on camera before. He plays quite tough characters usually, and for him, and he's a father, he has 2 boys in real life. I think for him, the opportunity to show that he can, that sort of tender, soft side, and to be able to do that also in the context of a character who has been in prison, and to kind of have the complexity of both sides in one role, in one film, I think was for him was what was the most appealing thing to him about the project. And he, but I think having Kevin as the producer gave him the confidence to say yes to a first-time director, because it is a risk for an actor. I mean, I always, feel that actors are so, every film for them is a risk, because it's their face, it's their voice, it's their image, it's their whole persona on the line. And you really want to feel like you're in safe hands. And so I think what gave them the confidence to say yes was having the script that they liked, and then the confidence of knowing that Kevin was the producer behind it. And then for Jenna, she's raising a little boy on her own as a single mother. And I think she very much empathized with the sort of struggles of Dolores as a single mother raising children. I think she feels that is, being a mother is difficult. We fetishize motherhood in our culture, I think, but it really is hard. It can be very hard, and especially on your own. And I think that she felt that she really wanted to kind of do justice to that side of the story, having been through that experience herself. So I think it was very personal for both actors. And I was just so incredibly lucky, because, it's when you hear your script read for the first time. When we sat down a few days before production started, and we did a table read of the script with all the actors in the room. And just to hear the words spoken by actors of that caliber just kind of blows your mind. You realize that everything you do as a director, as a writer, is insignificant, because when they come in, they put the emotion in it. I mean, you give them something to work with and something to start with, but all the emotion, all the heart, all the kind of sincerity comes from them. And I was just so lucky with those 2 actors, who are very different actors. They're very different acting styles. They're very different. They come to it from a different place. Pablo's background, Pablo did a lot of theater before he became a movie actor, so he's kind of he has that sort of discipline, that classical sort of discipline from the theater world. And Jenna is so intuitive as an actor. She kind of, every take for her is different. She kind of she's very in the moment. I mean, they both are, but I think so they come to it from very different places. But I was so lucky as well, but that they had chemistry on screen, and that they worked as a couple together in the film. And they worked, you believed that there's a sort of tension between them that I think really comes through. And you don't always get that, especially when you turn up on set on the first day and you don't know, you might have 2 amazing actors and they might not have chemistry. So I was so lucky. And it was great to have those actors as well, because we had 3 children who had never acted before. And so those children are complete newcomers to film. So it was amazing having Pablo and Jenna help with the children, because part of the reason the children's performances worked are because Pablo and Jenna helped with that. So for example, in the scene where Denham, Jenna's character Dolores is trying to make Denham wear pants, for a child, it's very, that scene is very hard, because Denham Parker, the actor who played Denham, had to spit at Jenna, kick at Jenna, and that was very hard. And she gave them permission to do that. She said, spit harder, I don't mind, spit all over me and kick me. And she really helped give Parker permission to feel comfortable with that. And she made it a game, and she made it funny. And Pablo did the same in the scene where Dodger, the Chancellor, the actor who plays Dodger, punches Wayland. Again, that's a difficult scene for a child to do, because children are trained to be nice, and these children all three children are really nice people, and they don't like being mean. And so, but the actors gave them permission to do that and made them feel safe doing that, and then it was all okay afterwards. And and Pablo did the same for Chancellor. So I was incredibly lucky that not only were they great for their own characters, but they were great for the children, and they really helped me with the children.
You talked, and Pablo, he physically changed quite a lot for the role, didn't he?
Yeah, he put on a lot of weight for the role. He's very he's shooting Halo right now in Hungary, which is a sort of super. He plays Master Chief in that, so he's kind of a sort of superhuman or a super being, and he's very sort of chiseled and muscly and kind of works out every day. And but what he did for us, which was a very kind for him to do this for an independent film, is he ate a lot of burgers. And even though he had muscle underneath, he put on weight over the muscle, so he looked strong in the way that a man in prison might be strong. Yeah. Because obviously in prison, people, you pass the time by doing weights and exercising. So he had that kind of physical strength that someone in prison might have, but he didn't have the kind of leanness that a Hollywood movie star would have, that would make it feel like, that he wasn't a real, he looked like a real person. He looked like a strong guy who had been in prison working out. Exactly. And he ate a lot. He put on a lot of weight, for us. And kind of, just kept eating. Every time we cut, he'd go and eat something so he could keep that weight on. So I'm very grateful for that. And then Jenna, we changed her hair for the part. We kind of, they both physically transformed a little bit for us as well, which I think was very kind of them to do, because, obviously, as an actor, that's just, it's really hard, because it's your face, it's your image, it's your whole persona on set. And, they agreed to sort of trust me and physically transform for the movie. And I think that helped a lot, to just kind of believing that the characters were who they were in the world that they live in.
Yeah, and when at the start of our talk, you hinted to your background, the blue collar background, and we talked about the setting of the film, which is quite special. How did you find this place and this milieu? Could you elaborate on that a bit? Yeah,
so we actually shot in 3 different places. We shot in and around Portland, Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest. So not so much in Portland, but in the countryside around Portland, which is very different from Portland proper. Portland is a very sort of very urban, very kind of cool music, cool sort of cafes. It's a very sort of cool Pacific Northwest city. And then around it, you've got countryside that very quickly feels like a different world from Portland. It feels very kind of evocative of other bits of rural America that I've seen. So, even though you're on the West Coast and it's the West Coast, and that's different from the rest of the country, when I visited, I had a sense of being in kind of anywhere America, small town America. And that for me was important. And, the proximity of, I was based out of LA. And so the proximity of Oregon to California, it's just the state above, allowed me to just go up and down a lot. And I was driving for about 1.5 years before we shot the film. I was going up and on a regular basis to Oregon to look for locations. And the proximity of California to Oregon allowed me to do that. And so we spent a long time just kind of, on a small independent film like this, where you don't have a team looking for locations for you. You know, really it's sort of, it's a very small number of people who are doing the location scouting. And so I was looking for locations myself, effectively just driving around the countryside, stopping whenever I saw anything interesting, and really just exploring every, you know, so we explored every small town around Portland. And you know, we'd knock on doors. If we found a house that looked interesting, we'd knock on the door and speak to the owner. And, you know, also kind of learned a lot about people's lives that way as well. It was nice, just kind of from a research perspective as well, just kind of speaking to people in small towns, you know, many of whom actually just coincidentally, we were knocking on doors, many of whom had sort of similar backgrounds to our characters, you know, had been in prison, had gotten mixed up in drugs, you know, were unemployed or underemployed, you know, worked a little bit, but didn't have enough money coming in to you know, to earn a proper living. And so it was, you know, from a, you know, the reason the locations are so good in the film is because we spent I think the way we added production value to this film was spending the time that we did looking for those locations. I mean, you know, that cemetery with that tree that's half struck by lightning and half dead and half living, which is such a beautiful metaphor for the film. We just drove past that and I was like, oh my, I couldn't have invented a location as good as that, and we just found it. So, and that was one, you know, you have a few locations that are your key, like that cemetery. I was like, I'm not compromising on it. I'm not filming in any other cemetery. We're filming in that cemetery. So we built a whole day of filming around that one location, and then found other stuff nearby that we could shoot on the same day, because we'd often shoot, you know, 3 or 4 locations on the same day and have to do company moves in the middle of the day, which I think, you know, is always difficult on film because it eats up time, and time is your enemy on an independent film. And then we also shot in Sacramento, because the dive bar, the mermaid bar at the end of the film, the only thing like that in the world is in Sacramento. And then we shot 2 days. So we shot 2 days in Sacramento, 2 days in LA, and then we shot 21 days around in the countryside and in the small towns around Portland. And it was just, you know, again, I mean, it was just sort of putting in the time and really, you know, really spending the time, you know, not outsourcing it to someone else, but me as the director, just spending the time going up and down and making that time commitment, which was valuable, you know, for many reasons as well. I mean, it helped me write the script as well.
So you said the biggest enemy shooting an independent film is the time, I guess, you know, once shooting. Yeah. And you also mentioned, obviously, there was quite some preparation for you. I mean, this is a project that develops over years. What were the biggest challenges for you realizing your feature debut?
The biggest challenges. Well, I was lucky in that I had other scripts written that I thought would be my feature debut. And then I met the person who paid for this film, who was the executive producer of this film. And he wanted, he's a wonderful retired businessman called Arnie Zimmerman. And he has always wanted to make a film. And now that he's retired, he decided to do it. And we met, and he wanted to make a film about a stepfather, because he had raised 4 children in his life that were not his biological children. They were his wife's children from her marriage before she met him. And he said it was the hardest thing he's ever done in his life, but the most rewarding and important thing he's ever done in his life is raise these children. And so he said, can you write me a script and can we make a movie? I met him and we decided to work together. And he said, I will pay for a movie on this theme. So can you write me a script? And, you know, obviously then it took me some time to think about how I would do that, because I wasn't raised by a stepfather. I thought, what is it about this story that's universal? What is it about this story that everyone will get? And I kept coming back to the idea of, I kept thinking about Paris, Texas, which is about, you know, a man that really doesn't get it right the first time. He gets it horribly wrong the first time. And he has this chance at the end to make it a little bit better. It's not, you know, and it's not, I don't think that film has a happy ending at all. I think it's a tragic film with some optimism in it. But he has a chance to redeem himself, and he has a chance to redefine himself as a man and as a father. And I kept coming back to this idea about second chances. And I think as a society, we're locked in a sort of ideological battle, I think, across the world between what it was like in the past and what it, and the future. And there are the people that want to pull us back, and there are people that want to pull us forward, and we don't seem to be able to talk to each other, so Brexit, for example, people wanting to kind of go back to Great Britain and how it used to be and be, our own sort of, and then the people who firmly see our future in Europe, progressive, international, and those two people we're pulled apart, and there's no dialogue, and and I wanted to just make a film that kind of has a respect for the past, that acknowledges the past is really important to us, but a film, which it is, but also a film that believes in the future and believes that you can, even if it, that the future for yourself as an individual, but collectively as a society, is if we cast our gaze forward. And I think the children in this film are a symbol of that. Wayland invests in the children, who are a symbol of the future. He gets pulled back into the past, but ultimately he decides to kind of, he decides to change, and he doesn't want to go back to who he was. And you can't go back to who you were. So you can think, oh, what if, yesterday was so great, I want to go back to yesterday, I want to redo it all. But ultimately the film casts its gaze forward, and ultimately the film says change is good. It's a film about a metamorphosis as well, like the female character transforms at the end. And so for me, I thought that was a timely message for now. It's not a political film, but in some subtle way, it addresses that tension, I think, between the past, people who kind of want to be back in the past, and people who want to forge ahead. I think it addresses that tension in a sort of subtle way. And it felt to me that was kind of what was contemporary about the film, but also universal, because, I think as humans, we very rarely think about the present. We think about what we could have done and should have done, and we think about what we're going to do. And it's, there is this kind of, the past weighs very heavily. And I'm a person for whom the past weighs very heavily. And I wanted, so that was the way I sort of, and I thought about the stepfather story as a kind of metaphor for that, someone who, succeeds the second or third time round. It's not like and he's a father in a different way to the way he imagined he might be a father, but he's still a father. And that's to me what felt universal about the story. So one of the big challenges, I think, of the film was finding my way into the stepfather story and making it meaningful for me, and kind of addressing the sort of almost, I want my films to kind of be, for me, the best cinema, and the cinema I want to make, is the cinema that kind of is a bit existential, that kind of really gets to why, the fun, why we're here, what we're here, and just makes you reflect on your own humanity. And, I felt that I could get to that. I found my way into that theme via the stepfather story, but that was a journey. It took me a while to kind of, and then once I found that story, I had the funding to make the film, which is a problem that is usually the biggest problem of making your first film, is finding the money. But the money, thankfully, Arnie had agreed to make the movie. And so once we got the script, the money was there. The actors said yes. My dream actors in many ways said yes immediately, which was amazing. I was so lucky in that sense. I mean, those two actors made it so easy for me to make the film work. And then, but just on set, then every day was a challenge, and every day there was a crisis. We lost our prison location. We had to sort of, we had to find another prison, which is very hard to do because it's hard to get to shoot in prisons. There are massive security concerns, especially if you're bringing in a bunch of motorcycles. And just being able to kind of do, this was a very ambitious film for the money that we had. Too ambitious. I mean, my producers were like, Sabrina, make it more simple. Do we need all the motorbikes? Do we, but we found ways around it. I mean, so, for the motorbikes, for example, that could have been very expensive, but we were so lucky in that we spent the time to make friends with the biker community around Portland. And we just, one of the producers, Sabrina, Friedman Seitz, and I just kind of really spent the time making friends, and we found someone who was our sort of fairy godfather, a guy called Tony Mothershead, who was a biker is a biker up near Portland, and introduced us to all his friends, and kind of really, and all his friends sort of came out and took part in the group scene, in the motorcycle scene. So we had this community of real bikers who bought their real bikes that, you know, and came out and sort of supported us for the day when we were shooting those scenes. And, you know, to be able to do that kind of scene on our kind of budget is impossible unless you have that kind of support and friendship. And so we got a lot of friendship from them, which I'm so grateful for, because we would never have been able to get all those bikes and all those, you know, which I think add to the kind of, they add to the sense of place, I think, and they give you a sense, they give you a sense of kind of the texture of the place in these people's lives. And they also kind of, I think they're also kind of exciting for viewers. I mean, bikers are kind of, there's a mythology around the biker, the lone biker, the kind of, there's a romance around it that I think gets people sort of hooked in. And I think, you know, again, when you're making an independent film, you sort of think, well, how am I going to hook people independent, you know, like what's going to kind of open this film up to a bigger audience? And I think kind of there's a romance around and a sort of mythology around the biker that I think is intriguing to people. And so having that in the movie, I think, was just so helpful, and I think will be helpful for the trailer and all sorts of other things. You know, really time was the biggest enemy. We shot in 25 days. And when you're shooting with children, you can't work with them more than a certain number of hours every day. There are very strict labor laws that protect the children, rightly so, from working too hard. And, you know, children get tired much quicker than adults. The younger a child is, the more tired they get more quickly, and they get very emotional when they're tired. And these laws are there for a reason. And so you have to kind of be very mindful of the child's energy and how much I mean, you know, they're there because the child only has a certain amount of energy for the day. And so there would, you know, it was just a challenge when you're sort of shooting only for 25 days, 25 days, and really 21 days up in Portland, to fit everything that we had to do, all the sort of child stuff, then all the crowd scenes, and kind of still sort of respect the actors and just give them the time that they need, and the sort of give them the space they need to sort of feel safe to get those performances. And, you know, again, I was very lucky that my actors were just great in 2 takes or 1 take or something. But, you know, again, it's just, you know, no one likes feeling rushed, and I think it's stressful for me to feel rushed. I can only imagine how stressful it is for an actor when they're trying to kind of when they're in a moment and they feel the chaos of a film set that is a small film set with not enough crew. You know, so it was just the logistic. By far the hardest thing about shooting this film was the logistics of that. Every day on set was very stressful. I mean, I can't even say I enjoyed it. I had moments when I enjoyed it. I had moments when I was just happy, when I'd be watching the monitor and the actors would be so good, and I, you know, those were the moments that made it all worth it. But the logistics of shooting a film this ambitious, and doesn't look ambitious, but it is for the money that we had and the time that we had on this budget, was hard. It was really hard. And you know, it just kind of takes over your life for the sort of 3 years that you're making a film like this. You're working around the clock and kind of putting your whole life into it. And that, you know, it's fine. I mean, I wouldn't have it any other way. I can't imagine doing anything else. And it's so rewarding, and but it's, you know, it's a privilege to be doing this. It's a privilege to be able to tell a story and to have conversations like this with you, and to be able to kind of connect with people all over the world. It's really a privilege, but, you know, you kind of work very hard for that privilege.
Well, I have to say, you know, it's our privilege to talk to you, to have you filmed, to hopefully have you soon at the festival.
I hope so.
And I think, you know, you just talked about existentialism and humanism, and I think this film really has this humanistic spark. And I just personally can say that I really felt attached to the characters and to the story. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.